Good evening, everyone. My name is Matt Levin, CEO of the Jewish Federation of South Palm Beach County. And on behalf of Larry Feldman, board chair, and our entire Federation family, we'd like to welcome you to our program tonight. Through our Rabbi's Eyes, a memorable mission to Israel, to recap the recent South Florida rabbinical mission to Israel with Rabbi Dan Levin of Temple Beth El and our very own Rabbi Josh Brody. Before we begin tonight's program, though, it's important that we take a moment to recognize the tragedy to the people of Surfside, to the families, the friends, and the entire community tonight that's dealing with this incredible loss. Please take a second. Thank you. By now, we're all Zoom professionals, so I'll quickly mention that you can adjust the way your screen appears. Our recommendations is you select Speaker View, which will highlight the person speaking. You will find this at the top of the Zoom screen. Your microphone will be muted throughout the program. I look forward to hearing from our friends, Rabbi Josh and Rabbi Dan, on their experiences while they were on the ground in Israel this past week. But first, some housekeeping. As you may know, the work the Jewish Federation of South Palm Beach County does is indispensable. Through our annual campaign, we take care of people everywhere, from right down the street to Israel and around the world, wherever Jews are. We are the dollars that our federation raises and allocate to its partner agencies. It enables us to provide critical assistance to those in need, including individuals and families, seniors, people with disabilities, and the unemployed. Federation builds and sustains a vibrant Jewish community, creating avenues for Jewish education and identity while fostering close ties to Israel. And yet, our challenge remains clear: to continue to protect the most vulnerable and vitalize our essential services. We need you to meet this moment. From now until June 30th, every dollar you donate can help us meet this moment. Your gift will be matched and your impact will be doubled. Now more than ever, our local and global Jewish community is counting on us. Together, we will thrive through these challenging times. Thank you. Also, I'd like to mention that the Jewish Federation of South Palm Beach County has launched a Newcomers Initiative co-chaired by Lisa Friedman Clark and Nancy Geffen. We are helping newcomers navigate their new Jewish community and make it feel like family and old friends. Please share our info with your new neighbors. We look forward to getting to know them. And at this time, I'd now like to welcome Rabbi Dan and Rabbi Josh. Let's get the show on the road. Gentlemen, I want to open up with a question to say, we know over the last 9 years how proud we are of our own community here in terms of being the kind of community where pluralism flourishes. We disagree without being disagreeable, and all the things that we know culminating in both the Unity Prize in 2017. And when I saw the pictures of that trip on Facebook and in advance, I saw what that unity represented, that a group of rabbis from across our religious spectrum, from all the streams, attending to the moment in time, at a time of solidarity, a time of need in Israel. That's the feeling I got from that picture. And for me, I take great pride in it. And I know that my colleagues as well do. And so you should, because frankly, it's what we've been talking about for so long. So through that lens, please talk a little bit about this mission and who went with you and what it was all about. And getting to Israel and taking your tests and all the fun part. Rabbi?
Wow. First of all, it's great to be here with Rabbi Dan. That's the best part. And Matt, and the only reason I feel a little bit left out, I'm the only one with a last name that doesn't end with Levin. So
you're outnumbered.
Here. But it was really special. I mean, we have a photograph of the group that went with us, a very, very large group, mostly from Miami, but we did have a group from Boca, from Broward, and it was really across all the denominations. You had Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, Ray Chabad rabbi joined us as well. And it was a very special trip. I love that picture, by the way. That was one of Dan's pictures where it's like, let's just take the picture in front of the sign because it's the only place you'll see unity. I mean, where else do you see that? And it's not just going with another colleague, it's going with one of my best friends. So very special.
I thought you'd like that picture because I was standing on a step, so I was 6 inches taller than you, which made me feel really good. What was really impressive about this mission, and I have to just say from the very get-go, how grateful I am to the Jewish Federation of South Palm Beach County, and especially to Rabbi Josh Brody, and also our colleagues at the Greater Miami Jewish Federation Rabbi Fred Klein and Rabbi Jeremy Barris, who really spearheaded and put this program together. You can't imagine the logistical triumph that it was to get permits from the consulate for us to be able to go. You can't just go to Israel these days. And to arrange for our itinerary to be put together on such short notice, and all of the things that would normally take weeks and weeks to be able to put together were put together literally in just a matter of a couple of weeks. It was just so grateful to the Federation, and especially my dear friend Josh. And one of the things, Matt, that I will share with you is for the rabbis from Miami-Dade and from Broward, the idea of spending this much time in a pluralistic setting with rabbis of different denominations was like brand new for them. One of the things that our last dinner together before we all scattered to go to the airport or wherever we were spending Shabbat, where all these other colleagues from Miami said, wow, it's amazing. We just spent the week together and we're Reformed, conservative, Orthodox. And Josh and I looked at each other like, we do this all the time. And I think it's a testament to our federation, our Jewish community, that things that seem revolutionary in other communities are kind of old hat for us. I will say it was incredibly important for us to be able to be there, especially at this time. One of the things that I always remember was during the Gulf War, 30 years ago, when the North American Jewish community kind of sort of pulled up their stakes and ran home. And our Israeli friends said to us, what, it's okay if we get hit by Scuds, but not okay for you, which was obviously a statement of pain. But I think there's always this question in Israel, do our friends in North America really care? Do they really understand what's happening to us? And so for us to be able to go and to give a chibuk, to give a hug to so many people who have been through such difficult times in these last weeks and months was incredibly important. I have to tell you, as soon as the war ended, all I could think of to myself, and I spoke about it with others, is, God, I want to go. I just want to go. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity to have just been able to be there to say, hey, in South Florida, we care. And your anguish is our anguish, and your experience is ours. And we want to give you an embrace that lets you know that the larger Jewish world is with you.
I'll mention to our audience that who may not be aware that both Rabbi Josh and Rabbi Dan truly are very close friends and have studied together and have spent several summers in Jerusalem at the Hardman Institute studying. And so this particular methodology that we talk about is something that we've put a lot of resources into, and these two have been very much in the lead of it. Well, let Josh talk a little bit just very quickly about some of the horror stories of getting there in terms of the visas and how that was for the group, and then we'll move on to some more of the serious subjects.
Right. So first of all, I remember Dan just reminded me, I was in the hotel and I was going up the elevator one day, and there was an Israeli family that was staying in the hotel because there's no tourism. It doesn't exist. And they saw the lanyard that we had around our neck, and they said, where are you from? Like, I don't understand. You're not Israeli. I said, no, we're visiting. We have a group of rabbis that are here. And they were so, on the one hand, shocked that there's actually a group of tourists that are coming to Israel. And on the other hand, they were so excited that a group was coming. And I made sure that wherever I went, even though I can speak Hebrew a little bit, I made sure that I only spoke in English, because I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew that we are Americans and we're back and we're here. And you should know that we're excited to see you. But I really have to give it to Dan, because probably the most exciting moment happened before we even got to the airport, where let me explain. In the good old days, you wanted to go to Israel. It wasn't that hard. You bought a ticket, you went to your travel agent, you went on Expedia and you bought a ticket. Now you have to get tests, and there's other tests and many, many different requirements you have to submit to the consulate before you even get approval just to go to Israel. So one of the simple things, you would think it's simple, is you just have to get a PCR test, and a PCR test has to take place within 72 hours of the flight. Can't get it more in advance. I know many people would say, okay, just get it a week before just to be safe. Doesn't work like that. You have to be within the 72-hour window. So we did, because we were concerned, many of us got even 2 PCR tests, just on the chance that one doesn't come back. But sure enough, the other one that came back inconclusive. So Dan and I had to wait. We were the only ones waiting for one final PCR test to come back. Without this PCR test, you cannot board the plane. 1 o'clock. 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. Remember, we have to take an Uber at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Dan calls me at 4 o'clock. Amy's dropping me off at your house. What are we doing? Are we going to the airport or are we not? The Uber showed up. Amy said goodbye. Simone said goodbye. We got in the Uber. We still did not have the PCR test. If we don't get it, you get to Miami, you're not getting on the plane. And I can tell you, there's a famous story. Dan can tell you the details. Nachshon, right? Goes into the waters. The waters weren't splitting until he stepped in. This was our Nachshon moment. We said, we're going into the cab. We're going to go. And we don't even know if we're going to get on this flight, but we made it. And sure enough,
I'm glad you guys made it and made it safely home. And thank you.
We are definitely in the faith business.
We're in the faith business.
So Rabbi Dan, I'm going to start with you a little bit. I've been on enough missions with you these days, and I've been down to the Gaza seam line. But obviously, every time you go and it's right after a conflict, the emotions are raw. They're scared. They don't know when it's going to go on, especially after the summer of 14, when we get into a summertime, a long, hot summer, post-pandemic. Talk a little about when you went down to the Gaza envelope. What groups did you guys meet with? What did they tell you? What was the feedback they gave you? And what are they looking for from our community? Rabbi Dan, why don't you open up and then Rabbi Josh will go.
Sure. So, I think, we met with a variety of different people while we were there. We visited with a group called the Israeli Trauma Coalition, who provide mental health services to people all over Israel, literally all over the world. And they're actually, I think, working right now with the community in Surfside to provide mental health services. We met with the team that runs what they call a resilience center in Eshkelon. Their budget for the year was for 200 and some odd clients. In a week and a half, they had more than 950 phone calls. And just to speak to this woman, Talia, who runs this center and coordinates this incredible work all throughout the state of Israel, she just sounded exhausted. She sounded soul tired from the stories that were being related to her of the trauma that people were enduring. She told us one story of a father who called and said his son will not leave the mamad, will not leave the safe room in their house. They live in Sderot. Will not leave. He hasn't been out of that room in 11 days. So they're talking about how do you, and she says, by the way, how old is your son? He says he's 28. So it's hard for us to imagine what it's like. We visited a kibbutz called Kfar Aza, which their farm fields literally abut the border with the Gaza Strip. Kibbutz was founded in 1957. And this woman, Chen Avrahami, that we met, grew up on the kibbutz. Her parents are founders of the kibbutz. She's raising her family on the kibbutz. Why? Because it's magnificent there. It's idyllic. She says, my son can ride his bike. He can leave it around. No one's here. It's just except for the souvenirs that sometimes land in their front yard, which she showed us when we visited her house.
Rabbi Dan,
I think we have a picture of that.
Put the photos. Brian, put the photos up. Keep going, Rabbi Dan. Go ahead. Go ahead, Rabbi Dan. Keep going.
And she said, we heard every single one. This young soldier is part of the IDF was explained to us about the Iron Dome installation that we visited. And they heard every one of those 4,400 rockets go overhead. Imagine what that's like for 11 days to hear thousands of rockets screaming over your house. We often look at pictures and see, but imagine for 11 days, it's like the finale every night of the 4th of July, except it's not fireworks. These are weapons of war. And the Iron Dome, which you see on the screen before you, the interceptor rockets intercept those rockets over her house. So she showed us the different pieces of shrapnel that land in her front yard. And her sister has little children, lives in the kibbutz, and she's like, the kids say, hey, can I go over and play at so-and-so's house? Do you let them out? Can I go to work? My office is across the lot, still on the kibbutz. Can I leave my kids at the house and go across? What if they literally have 15 seconds to get to the mamad in these communities. In Ashkelon, we visited the home of a man named Adi, who unfortunately lost his wife. This is Adi. He lost his wife to cancer about 6 months ago. He lives in his home. He's got 4 children, one's in the army, one's out of the army, and 2 are at home. And so, you know, they had 1,000 rockets go to Ashkelon. And so he's back and forth to Mamad in his beautiful home. And they get in there and they hear this huge crash. And when he comes out of the Mamad, this is what he sees in the kitchen. You can see that big rocket sitting in the new window that now exists in his kitchen that didn't exist there before. And this is, you know, came literally right through the roof of his house and destroyed his kitchen. And he actually, in rebuilding his house, has installed a window where the missile went through the wall to remember what was done to his home. And what was so amazing to me was being there with a group of rabbis. There's the shrapnel dents in his refrigerator. But to be in his living room with him and a group of rabbis, to be able to say El Male for his wife and to be able to pray for him and his family that they should know only safety and peace, that was just one of the many, many moving events that we had down in that area.
Rabbi Josh, I'm going to go to you to continue on with Gaza, but talk a little about the mood among people. Was it some sense of despair? Are there they attending to the needs? Is money from the diaspora coming in from elsewhere? Is there emergency aid? Give us some more sense of it. And obviously, if you need whatever pictures Brian can show.
Oh, these are great pictures. I mean, each one of them is amazing. This is actually a photograph of from a bird's eye view of his house. You can see where the rocket went through, and you can see his finger. He's actually showing us here a picture of on his cell phone. There was a video he had. These are beautiful homes. Look at the pool in the backyard. I mean, these are beautiful homes in Ashkelon, only a very short distance from Gaza. But at the same time, this is a community. If you go down to Gaza, which is more of a kibbutz-like setting, you would think people would be running away from these communities. And what we found out that in the Gaza envelope, I think they said there was about 10,000 residents right now. So you would say, okay, based on the recent war, based on the 5,000 rockets, they're probably going to have, a few thousand of them are going to leave and they're going to move out of Gaza or that area of that border city of cities of Gaza. But on the contrary, and look, this is an amazing picture that Rabbi Dan took over here. There's a few things to look at, but she's actually holding up. We've all heard of those fire balloons, the balloons that go up. She shows you here, there's the balloon on the right side. There's the ignition or whatever it is, the thing that's lit on the left side. And in front of you, you see the rockets. And what was so interesting, you can't see all 4 in this picture, but from the left to the right, there's 3. There's another small one that's lying down right in front of her on the far right side. These are the different rockets. Okay, there's 2 there, and you'll see, you can't see it in the photo, but these are the different types of rockets that they used at different intervals of the last 20 years. 20 years ago, you see that one on the left. 15 years ago, you see the one that's next to it. And then you see how more sophisticated they become until you get to this one, which I don't know if we're really allowed to show that one because that's actually that's not one of their rockets. That's one of our Iron Dome batteries. So what I was saying in terms of the population, you'd think that many would be leaving, but on the contrary, they expect that the population is going to grow from 10,000 to 20,000 in the next few years. So people aren't rushing out of these communities. They're rushing into the communities. And the problem is not enough. It's not that the people are leaving. They don't have enough room to accommodate all the people who want to go. But just personally, you just saw a piece of an Iron Dome rocket shell that landed in this little village, in this community. And it was very exciting for me to go back because our little daughter, I don't have a picture on the screen, but I got one right here. To go back to the live thing, it's little Avigail. She's in the Iron Dome unit of it's called Chal Avir, which is the Israeli Air Force. So we didn't get to see her on this trip, but this is the unit that one of our little girls of Boca is now serving in. So
Rabbi Josh, it's incredible pride, and you should have incredible pride to tell us about it all the time. It's really terrific. Let me move to a new topic because we'll come back to any comments you have. But one of the unique I think moments of that 12-day experience of war was for the first time, and we had seen it before, conflict with Arab Israelis, but not at the scale that we saw it during this conflict. And certainly the violence in Lod became a unique characteristic of this. And so I know you all were there. You met with people there. So Josh, let me just start with you briefly, and then there's a lot of questions related to it. So I want to let you guys. I'll prompt you each, and we can go through it. But first, talk about what Lod is. Who lives in Lod, and what's a mixed city really about? And for that matter, just talk about what happened during the conflict, so we can kind of set the stage and then I'll bring it back to Rabbi Dan.
So Lod is a city which many people would have heard about or read about if they were watching any of the news about the conflict. You might not recognize the city, but you all know the city, because if you've ever landed in Israel in Ben Gurion Airport, you've essentially landed in Lod. One of the big challenges about for this community is that it needs money. It needs a lot of money, and they feel they should be getting a lot more money from tax dollars or revenue coming in from the airport, which they're not receiving. But it's a mixed community, and what that means, and obviously many are going to argue how to define these terms, just like many issues that the current state of affairs are in Israel, is it's a mixed city. There are Jews that live alongside Arabs, and it's not that there's a section of the community which is the Arab city and the other section is the Jewish community, but you'll see it, as Rabbi Dan will explain as well. They're in the same apartment building. So my neighbor might be Jewish, or my other neighbor might be an Arab. And the question is, how can you live alongside one another? It's very complicated. I mean, I have so much to share, but maybe if Rabbi Dan wants to pick it up a little bit. I mean, there's so many stories we can go into.
Rabbi Dan, why don't you pick it up, and why don't you talk a little bit about the Garin Torani?
So sure. So Lod is an interesting city because of its history. It tends to have a very low socioeconomic base, and so the Garin Torani are religious Zionists who have sort of directed their attention not in terms of building settlements in Judea and Samaria and the West Bank, but more into communities in Israel proper. And so they have decided to sort of build a stronger Jewish presence in a place like Lod. And the idea is that if you bring people who have jobs and a stronger Jewish community, you build greater social fabric, you build more social capital, and you strengthen the fabric of the city. So there's been a lot of sort of work trying to have coexistence. And so if you can just, Brian, go back a couple of slides there. This is a Beit Midrash. This is a synagogue and a school, which was attacked by arsonists and burned. They've already begun much of the reconstruction. It's amazing how quickly you see things starting to be reconstructed. We met with people inside of that building, and the interior is almost all completely rebuilt. But if you go to the next slide, Brian, you can see, actually go back a couple to where you saw, you know, the folios of burnt tractates of Talmud that were found there. You know, it's gut wrenching. They took us to see, as Josh was saying, an apartment where there was a young Jewish family living. Other people in the apartment are Arab. And the Jewish family went away during the violence, and people broke into their apartment and committed arson against it. Now you can show what the inside of that apartment looks like, Brian. You can see the children's toys. This is a child's bedroom. Thankfully, no one was there, but you can see the apartment is completely ruined, and the Jewish family is not going to return. So to see these sites and to hear the anguish and the anger and the frustration and the disappointment from these people who have moved there to try to breathe more Jewish life into that community is hard. What's hard is also that some in the Arab community in Lod see this infusion of Jewish people moving to a city that was once an Arab city. And they see them almost like settlers, even though they're within the boundaries of the modern state of Israel. Any Jew should be able to live anywhere in the modern state of Israel. So the Garin Torani, they're not going to be foiled. And they're actually, we had a wonderful conversation with one of the rabbis of their community, who really wants to build efforts of coexistence while growing their community, and is open to those kinds of conversations. And there's still actually, I think, among people, there's certainly bitterness. You could hear the bitterness, but also a sense of desire for resilience and reconciliation.
But is there a willingness on the part of some of the Arab Israeli leaders in the community, based on after some of these pieces, to come back to the table, recognizing that the people who did the burning are going to maybe be sitting across from you, or maybe having a conversation with you, and vice versa? You know, certainly the the Jews in the community who responded.
Right.
And so is there
we
right
met
now a
with-
sense of that?
Yeah, so we met with a woman named Shireen Naturhafi, who is the principal of
Ort school.
an Ort school, the first Israeli Arab high school in Lod. She herself has an amazing story. I'll tell her story and I'll let Josh talk about our visit with her, which was incredibly moving. So she grew up in Lod as a Muslim, mostly secular, but a Muslim Palestinian woman. And her father decided that when she was 14, she should attend the Jewish high school as opposed to the Arab high school, which was in a neighboring town. Because why? Because it was the best high school. And she then went to Bar Ilan University and studied Hebrew literature for her major. A master's in Hebrew literature from Bar Ilan, and then taught for 14 years in Jewish high schools in Israel. So imagine what this is. You have a Muslim Palestinian woman teaching Jewish kids their narrative, teaching them their literature. And then she decided that she was going to go back and work with her people in her community and started this high school. She started the high school in 2000, I think in 2010, 2009. They had 150 kids. She actually got death threats for starting the school because in that culture, for a woman to lead a school is a little more modern than some people were willing to accept. She was completely undeterred. There are now 1,350 kids in this high school. They are absolutely, literally banging down the doors to get into this school. And she treats each and every one of these students like her own. The boy on my left, on your right on this screen is a young man named Hamad. He's a senior in high school. And when he was sitting visiting with us, he got up to close the door of the auditorium before his compadres came in to sit with us. And she whispered to our group, his father is the most dangerous man in Lud.
Yep.
And I'll let Josh talk a little bit about our visit with these three wonderful high school students and with Shireen, who is, I think in many ways, a prophetic figure.
Yeah, Josh, talk a little bit about the school and the students, and then any other closing thoughts on Lod before we move on to the new government. Rabbi.
Sure. So first of all, it was a very, very interesting conversation. And, you know, some people can say, well, you know what, she's saying one thing to you, but she would say something to others. The fact that she brought three of her students in and she's saying it in front of them. So it just shows you how open she is. She's a fantastic educator. And this is not the first time we actually met her. I think Rabbi Dan and I met her a few years ago on Hartman day trip. She's really special, and anyone who wants to Google her, they can watch some of her talks on YouTube. But I think some of the interesting conversations that came up even before we met with her, trying to understand this challenging situation between the two sides, was we met with the Garin Torani and we met with one of their community leaders, and she told us how she grew up in the city of Efrat. Right? Efrat's a wonderful place. We have many, many friends that live in Efrat. Rabbi Brander, right, who's now the head of Or Torah Stone in Efrat. And she said she grew up, unfortunately, with such a negative understanding of or appreciation of Arabs and who they were, to the point where she said she hates them. I cannot speak to them. I hate them. They've only hurt my friends, physically hurt my friends, killed a friend of mine. So I don't want to have anything to do with them. And when she moved into this community of Lud, and her next door neighbor now is an Arab, how do you put those two things together? To have such hatred for someone, and yet they're going to be now your next door neighbor. In Efrat, they're not their next door neighbors. They live in the next community, and there's a big wall between them. But here, they're next door neighbors. She said over the years, and it took years, 10 years, she slowly started to become friendly. They didn't say best friends, but they said friendly with one another, and to the point where things were actually really, really nice within the community. And then this all breaks out. And what do? Just imagine this. You hated the person or the people. Now you became friends with the person. But now you see that person the night, when everything's, all hell's breaking loose, and you see that person, trying to light your car on fire. What do? How do you even explain that? How do you put that into words? That's one thing that we heard. We heard another thing where you see what happens with the sirens that were going off. Remember, it wasn't just that this was an eruption and a fight between Arabs and Jews on any given night of the year. You're talking about this is happening when rockets are falling all over Israel. Specifically, there was one that landed in Lod. Now you have to go and run into your bomb shelter. But remember, it's such a poor community. The apartments don't have their own bomb shelters. You have to go into the community one, which is outside. Do you run outside with your children to go and find shelter in a bomb shelter because rockets are flying overhead, but there are people burning my cars and burning my apartments? Maybe I should stay in my apartment because it's safer. A rocket might launch into my apartment, but it's safer than going outside. These are the questions that people had to ask themselves. It was really, really amazing. Yeah.
Let me, we're going to turn our attention.
Matt, if I can add one last,
Absolutely,
one
sure,
last
Rabbi.
part about Lud. One of the things that Shireen shared with us, there are two things that she shared with us that were just really moving. One was, we asked the students there, what was your experience? And they saw Jews rampaging through their town, throwing Molotov cocktails at businesses, marking Arab homes for attack. They would call the police, no one would respond. And they were really terrified. They actually lost a classmate, as Josh and Martin noted, a 10th grade student died, and her father, because of a Hamas rocket that made it through the Iron Dome and hit their apartment and killed her. And imagine how complex that is for the Arab students. But what she said to us, which was really amazing, was she said, look, I am an Israeli. I'm a Palestinian Israeli, and I'm a minority in a Jewish country, and I'm totally okay with that. In the same way, she said, you are a minority in your country, and you're okay with that too. All I ask is that don't erase me.
Right.
Don't make me have to hide my identity. Allow me to live my life as I choose, live where I choose, have the career that I choose, and just respect me for who I am. I don't need to, I'm perfectly happy to live in Israel as a Jewish country and recognize it as such. And we said, well, that's lovely, but who else thinks that? She said, I'll tell you, she thinks the majority of Arab Israelis feel that way. But they're afraid that they're going to be erased. They see what happens with the expulsion of people from apartments. It's a very long, difficult tale of what happened in Sheikh Jarrah, but they see that so symbolically as a domino that will knock over all the dominoes that will erase Palestinians from this land. And they have no faith. And so how does she work to build that faith? She commissioned her students to create a poster campaign that included verses from the Torah and from the Quran that both talk about peace and love. And the students designed these posters, and they're going to put them up all over the city in Jewish areas and Arab areas, because her students want to communicate to their neighbors that they desire peace and coexistence. So even in the midst of a dark and difficult set of experiences, there were a lot of glimmers of really inspiring opportunities for hope.
I thought it was amazing also when one of the rabbis said to her, he said, what do you feel about Hatikva? Do you as an Arab Israeli feel like you want to amend the Hatikva? Do you want to change the words to make it more inclusive? She says, listen, I've lived in France and I've lived in America. The country I live in, I sing the national anthem. That's our national anthem. It's very powerful, very powerful.
Let's quickly move on as we're getting a little late. Let's move on to the new government, and I want to frame this in two ways. One is about the government, one is about Israel. 20 years ago, we can all remember this. In the early 2000s, we talked about the startup nation, and we would give a speech when I was at APAC. Rabbi Dan, I'm sure you from the pulpit, and you, Josh, as well. We talk about the startup nation and talk about all the listed products that Israel created in the world. In the midst of all of this over the last year, Israel obviously took a lead in saving the world, at least in terms of helping develop the Pfizer vaccine, along with everything else and other therapies and stuff. And so one question, and I'll get to that, is one, I want you to talk about that. Is there a sense of pride among Israelis and others about their contribution to world health after this pandemic and what's gone on in the pandemic? But the other part, let's talk about the mood among the Israelis themselves. Certainly, what's the mood in terms of the new Israeli government? I'm going to throw one more piece at this at you too, because I want to cover it all in one piece. for the last several years, we've talked a lot about, and under a Bibi government, some of the tensions that existed between the streams of Judaism. And as you know, we've navigated this in our own community, and yet I think we navigated it the way in which we probably have to. But there seems to be some optimism now that at least there's going to be more dialogue within the reform conservative movements with this new government. So while you're at it, address some of those issues as well, because I think that in our community, as you know, that continues to, people ask the question and want to know, what's the future in terms of diaspora relations through that lens. Rabbi Josh, I don't care who starts, doesn't really matter to me, whoever, you guys work it out.
That's great. I'll just start by introducing it. The day that we landed was the day after the new government began. So the timing couldn't have been any better. I mean, it was so exciting just to be there, no matter who the government is, but the fact that it's a brand new government. And even though we had a quarantine right away as soon as we got there, because you have to wait till you get a serological test. So we actually had over here, this is the editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post, who gave us a fantastic understanding of what's taking place right now in the, as the events were unfolding. He was really great. And I think what's so interesting is that, he says, traditionally the Jerusalem Post has been viewed as a center-right newspaper, but now he's getting accused a lot of being part of the left. So he says, no matter who or how we write, you're always going to get accused that you're being too much to the other side. That week I spoke to my aunt and uncle who live in Israel, and I said, oh, guess who we just met? The editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post. They said, oh, see, he's going to the left. We don't like it anymore. So no, that's the whole point. So no matter who you are, you're always going to have an opinion. You can never get it right. And part of the conversation we had with him and with Daniel Hartman and the staff over Hartman is that you have a new government right now, which has an elected leader who was definitely to the right of Bibi Netanyahu, but is being praised by the left as being the new Mashiach of the Israeli government. And where exactly is that center? How do you, it includes an Arab party. We learned how diverse it is. You got the first Reform rabbi as a member of the Knesset, Gilad Kariv, and so many others. And where exactly does this fall? And it was so interesting just having these conversations with people that actually know what's actually taking place.
So we had the privilege of meeting the president-elect of the state of Israel, Isaac Herzog, who is as close to Israeli royalty, I think, as they come, given his lineage with his grandfather, who was a great rabbi and sage, and his father, and he's no slouch himself in his political career. And one of the things that I felt, having met with a bunch of different folks, is that they're very tired. They're tired not just of having to endure the war with Gaza, but they're tired of all of the internal conflicts. And they were ready for change. What's interesting is that this government would have been the most right-wing government in recent times were it not for the fact that Bibi Netanyahu wanted to be in the government. Likud could have formed a very right-wing, hard right coalition government if Bibi had stepped down. There are so many who didn't want to be in the government because of Bibi Netanyahu personally, even though he is still, as was mentioned to us by several of the experts that we met with, a very strong political force in Israel and is not going away. What is interesting, though, is that you have for the first time a prime minister who is a religious Jew. Begin came from religious roots and would be happy to put on a kippah when asked, but Naftali Bennett is the first real modern Orthodox head of state in Israel's history. And his partner, Yair Lapid, is a member of a Reform synagogue in Tel Aviv. Right. These things, it's hard to even imagine. You have an Islamist party who has very, very strong social conservatism in the same government as left-wing parties who are advocating for gay rights. Right. And so the big question is, how long can a government like this hold? Which doesn't include, for the first time in a long time, any of the Orthodox parties, and doesn't include the Likud. It includes parties to the right of Likud, and includes a lot of parties to the left of Likud. And so what we heard from many was actually they believe that this government could last for quite a while. And the reason is that there is so much more that people want to get done that transcends the personhood of Benjamin Netanyahu, the longest serving prime minister in Israel. There's a major economic fallout from COVID-19 in Israel, a huge economic hole that needs to be remedied. There are any number of just basic nuts and bolts economic infrastructure kinds of things that people want to get done. And there's also a sense that this is an opportunity to make some progress on the prospects of civil marriage in Israel, which for many Israelis is really important. A resuscitation of the Kotel agreement that had been stymied, that they think actually may be able to be implemented now. So many Israelis that I spoke with have this sense of optimism, even as it's almost like the optimism of someone who's walking a tightrope, knowing that it could be very easy to fall, but that you could do some amazing things if you keep your balance.
I want to bring it back to the opening. Were you able to have time with the rabbis to talk about our community? I don't mean to make it about us in this particular case, but were you able to talk a question about unity and how we go about this stuff? Was it a sense of a topic at all?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I like to bring that up all the time. And it's an easy conversation to have with others. I think that the question that I like to bring up with other rabbis is, what do you think can be done when you do have a sense of unity? And what are the parts of the community that we can really, challenges that we could address when we do work together? And it's nice. Sometimes it's refreshing to have the conversation with outsiders to say, oh, I didn't realize that you could do that. Why didn't you try this? That was a lot of fun. And I think the best part of the trip, I don't know about Rabbi Dan, but I didn't know more than half of the people. I mean, I only knew a few people going on the trip and made some new friends. And then we already have a reunion scheduled to see each other again. So can't wait to see everyone.
Rabbi Dan, some lasting impressions from your days in Israel?
So I would say, first of all, I agree with Josh. It was really great to meet some new colleagues. One of the things that was amazing is I was one of the old men on the trip, and a lot of young colleagues were with us, which was great. And one of the things that we, have realized in our community, and that I think is seeping south in South Florida, is the sense that our denominational divides do not need to be community divides. So I can feel more comfortable with the ideology of a reform or a conservative or an Orthodox synagogue for the way I want to live my Jewish life, but that doesn't dictate how I relate with others in my community. As you know, and as I'm sure so many who are with us tonight know, Temple Bethel and Boca Raton Synagogue have done all kinds of collaboration specifically around support for the state of Israel. And so you had young and getting older rabbis who were with us.
Senior rabbi has a new meaning.
Yeah, with all this gray hair that I'm growing. But all of whom obviously cared deeply, deeply for the state of Israel. Otherwise, you wouldn't have gone through all of the effort and the expense and the hoops that we went through to participate in a mission like this. And that was very inspiring. And one of the people on our trip actually is the rabbi who leads Hillel at the University of Miami, which is by design a pluralistic environment. He himself was telling me an amazing story about, even though he attended Hebrew Union College, he's a Reform rabbi, his practice is much, much, much more traditional than you would expect from an average Reform Jew. And we all just sort of realized that what used to be these very rigid Reform, conservative, Orthodox lanes in the swimming pool, they pretty much, I think, we're pulling out the lane ropes and we're just swimming laps together and realizing that swimming together in the same pool is what we are as Jews. That doesn't mean that I look at Torah the same way that some of the other rabbis do, and that we don't have our own individual ways of looking at that, but that we have so much to learn. One of the things that Shireen said with us, which was really, I think, indicative also of what we learned from each other, is she said, I can have a conversation with people who agree with me. I'm not at all interested in that conversation. Right. I don't learn anything from that conversation. The conversations that I want to be a part of and that interest me are the conversations I have with people who are Davka very different from me. And I think Josh and I learned from our experience at Hartman and through our friendship over these many years that we enrich ourselves so deeply as individual Jews and certainly as rabbis by virtue of the time and the learning and the investment in relationships with people who look at Torah and Jewish life differently than we do.
To my colleague, Rabbi Josh, I'm going to give you the last one here. How important is it, both to the man in the street Israeli, but and to each of us in the diaspora, that we get back to Israel as soon as possible?
That's great. That's a great way to end, because I think one of the unique things that a group of rabbis do on a trip, besides the stuff that's not printed on the itinerary, which is the time to really hang out. I'm not going to say what happened after hours, but let's just say the rabbis really get to become closer with one another. It's that bonding time. But there was something very unique that happened with each of the stops that we made, where a different rabbi would give a blessing to the community. So Rabbi Dan gave one when we were down in Kfar Aza. There was one that another rabbi gave to the man whose house was just bombed and who just lost his wife. I'm saying he has gone through so much. And right after that, when you give a hug, you give a blessing, and then you give a hug to whoever it is, the mayor of the city or the person whose house was bombed, you just see that there is something so meaningful that happens in that moment. It's like, this is why we came. We came for the shawarma, we came for the falafel, and we came for the good times that we're going to share. But we came to show that we're here. We're thinking of you, and it was great. God willing, Israel will be open again soon. We're going to continue to take lots of trips. I see Marla looking at me there. She's like, "Don't talk about that yet. We're not there yet." But we're going to be talking about lots of community trips, and everyone wants to get back to Israel.
Rabbi Josh, you and Rabbi Dan, I know I speak on behalf of Larry Feldman, our board chair, and Helene Paul, our chair of JCRC. You both are just extremely incredible ambassadors for our community, and everything you do on a regular basis, daily and weekly and monthly and yearly, and taking this kind of leadership is extraordinary. We're very proud of you that you represented us, and we can't wait. And we're a little envious that we didn't go, and we're hoping to be there as soon as we possibly can. Thank you both for sharing your stories and your pictures with us, and thanks to all of you tonight for joining us this evening. I'm excited to continue seeing you at upcoming Federation events. Look for emails for additional meaningful ways to connect with our Federation and our Jewish community. Together with our caring community, we thrive. Good night, rabbis. Good night, all. Have a great night.